Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This video is not a refutation to the argument of Islam's position in regards to whether the sun goes into a muddy spring, nor is it about the hadith of the sun going under the throne. Both topics have been dealt with before on my channel. This video is about the position of a certain egotistical content creator that's too proud to admit that he was caught red-handed shifting his position. And now, boom intro.
Okay, boom. I just started. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Yeah, the budget's a bit tighter than it used to be. Whatever, get used to it. In all seriousness, I dislike making videos that I don't really feel are necessary, but I do feel that this one is somewhat significant because this is one of the main reasons that the face of the ex-Muslim community left Islam. Sorry, Samuel, it's not 2016 anymore. Now, due to this, I feel like I'd like to take you on a journey of his journey to show you what exactly happened. Years ago, he made multiple videos about the sun literally going into a muddy spring, claiming that this is the orthodox Islamic position. I made a video response to him. Around a week ago, he made a video response to me. Now, in this video response, he said some very interesting things. First of all, it's about what he didn't say. Nowhere in the video did he show support for his original position. Not once did he say that according to Islam, the sun literally sets into a muddy spring. I also made two objections, one that has to do with the linguistics of the verse in question. The second has to do with a hadith that he quoted in order to affirm his understanding of the verse. In regards to the linguistics, he said,
But our friend Farid here spends a huge chunk of his refutation video, and he acts like I am making the claim that founded can only mean that this is a general truth, an objective reality, and then tries to refute that, a straw man which he built in his own head. Farid, I'm not the one making the claim that this word is necessarily in reference to something literally happening, or the opposite.
Now, this is a concession, since in the past he argued that based on linguistics, denying that this is a general truth is absolute garbage. Now, he admits that linguistically, both positions are valid. Nice. He does admit something, though. He realizes that speaking about the linguistics of the verse isn't sufficient, and that external evidence is needed to argue for or against.
But we could never convince each other. So, therefore, I want to do what Islamic scholars do. I want to go and look at hadith.
Which brings us to his second point. A hadith that actually says the sun literally sets in a muddy spring. This is what he has to say.
Farid's next objection is actually valid, and that is rare. I now do agree that that hadith is questionable.
And finally, in the previous video, he made the following claim.
There are only two options. 1. The sun sinks in a muddy spring. And 2. The sun goes beneath the throne to ask permission and to rise again.
Now, based on this, I assumed that he had conceded the muddy spring theory, since the hadith of the sun going under the throne is an actual authentic hadith as opposed to the other one. Now, to summarize, in his video, he doesn't attempt to push for the muddy spring theory. He admits that linguistically the verse isn't necessarily literal. He admits that the hadith of Sunan Nabi Dawud is actually weak. He holds on to the hadith that says the sun sets under the throne. Now, my conclusion from all this is he no longer is advocating for the muddy spring theory. Oh, and let's not forget that he actually edited the second out of his video and tried to explain it away. So now the question is, why did he remove that part where he says, not a general truth? Well,
Very simple, because it's repetitive, unnecessary, because I always cut videos shorter to make things more concise.
now, I don't know if the people that follow you are that gullible, but this is just too disrespectful, man. And there's another thing. Now, since when did you start caring about avoiding repetition? You more or less made the same video twice. Your last video against me was riddled with repetition. Since when did you care about not repeating yourself? But hey, just for you guys, I'm gonna play the difference between the two clips.
Many say that the translation is simply not clear, and that you need to read it in a context, that the word used for finding it actually describes the situation only from Dhul-Qarnayn's perspective, not as a general truth. So when the Quran verse here says, he found it setting in a muddy spring, it means that he saw it that way, not that the sun actually sets in a muddy spring. Many say that the translation is simply not clear, that the word used for finding it actually describes the situation only from Dhul-Qarnayn's perspective. So when the Quran verse here says, he found it setting in a muddy spring, it means that he saw it that way, not that the sun actually sets in a muddy spring. Does removing, not as a general truth, change anything at all about what's being said here? No, it doesn't. I'm sorry. Because I already say here that the word used for finding it actually describes the situation only from Dhul-Qarnayn's perspective. That is the same thing as saying not as a general truth. That is merely a repetition of the thought, which is why I removed that from my quoted video.
Now let me show you the difference between both clips. He refers to something as absolute garbage,
As a lover of linguistics, I have to say that that's absolute garbage.
and the first clip, absolute garbage, is referring to
Many say that the translation is simply not clear, and that you need to read it in a context, that the word used for finding it actually describes the situation only from Dhul-Qarnayn's perspective, not as a general truth.
in the new clip. Absolute garbage is
Many say that the translation is simply not clear, that the word used for finding it actually describes the situation only from Dhul-Qarnayn's perspective.
Now here is what he says later.
And he acts like I am making the claim that found it can only mean that this is a general truth,
So when he said,
not as a general truth.
he's directly going against what he said in this clip.
And he acts like I am making the claim that found it can only mean that this is a general truth.
But when he said,
The word used for finding it actually describes the situation only from Dhul-Qarnayn's perspective.
it sounds nowhere close to as bad as when he said,
And he acts like I am making the claim that found it can only mean that this is a general truth.
so I hope that's clear. Even though both statements generally imply the same thing, the first statement is a clear contradiction. By the way, this isn't the first time he does something like this. This is a recurring theme in which people that deal with this guy have to yank his position out of him because he's purposefully trying to be vague. The same thing happened with the whole incest discussion. He'll say things like he's fine with it, why not?
I'm fine with it, why not?
But when he's asked if he's okay with incest, he'll say it depends on the definition of incest and the definition of okay. Then watch him jump around in order to avoid judgment. The reality is that in a 1-minute discussion with Armin, he changed his worldview. But now that he's being confronted about it, he switches back to his previous position. Anyhow, I'd like to summarize my points before wrapping up this video. When the verse speaks of the sun setting into a muddy spring, Allah isn't speaking of a physical reality. He isn't saying, when Dhul-Qarnayn reached the place where the sun sets into a muddy spring. Instead, he says, Dhul-Qarnayn found the sun setting into a muddy spring. There's a big difference. Either way, the linguistic argument won't convince any reasonable person.
But we could never convince each other, so therefore I want to do what Islamic scholars do. I want to go and look at hadith.
Point number 2. The hadith that says that the sun sets into a muddy spring cannot be relied upon.
I now do agree that that hadith is questionable.
But luckily, we have one hadith that is authentic, which is the hadith of Abu Dhar in Sahih al-Bukhari. When he is asked about where the sun goes, Abu Dhar, who's supposed to know, admits ignorance, despite the existence of the verse, meaning that he didn't take it literally. The Prophet, peace be upon him, also did not quote the verse in question because he didn't take it literally either. And these points on their own are sufficient, even though I actually have more points that I'll be presenting in another video. some of which I've never seen used before. But I will have to admit that this is a low IQ argument against Islam, so using additional arguments isn't even necessary. In any case, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
But if you are above a certain age, then you can, for example, make a marriage that would be biologically considered incest. So, which means if you can't bear children anymore, then you can do it. You know, I'm fine with it. Why not?